Our next presenter is Matt Hill. Matt serves as the information specialist and federal lobbyist for the Intertribal Timber Council. He previously worked in the United States Senate for 10 years, focusing on tribal and forest management issues for Senator Gordon Smith of Oregon. Matt is a graduate of Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. He currently resides in his hometown of Glide, Oregon. Please welcome Matt.
Good morning. As always, a lot of things change in the world between when I write my update and the slides and when I get up here, so I have some additional notes I'm going to refer to. One thing that I was thinking about as the speakers were addressing you this morning is just where we are here at Menominee, and we've been here before ITC. One of my first, I think, symposia was here. But also where I come from in Southwest Oregon, all of the tribes in Western Oregon were terminated. Their recognition was terminated by Congress in 1954 by an act. Menominee was as well in 1954, and that was the policy and the posture of the United States government in the 1950s, was just get rid of tribes. Just set them free, let them be, full Americans without this, tribal government structure. Get rid of the trust responsibility, get rid of funding, get rid of any connection between the United States and tribes. And fortunately, that changed, and Menominee was the first tribe to be restored to federal recognition, I think in 1973. And then the Oregon tribes, where I come from, followed with Siletz 1977, Coos, Grand Ronde, Klamath, Coquille. So Menominee really started turning that tide back, and I just think about how far we've come from the federal government terminating tribes, getting rid of tribal land ownership, getting rid of the trust responsibility, to bringing that back, and some of the topics we're talking about now, which is the tribes being able to co-steward and co-manage all federal lands and federal resources, and that era that we're in now, and it's still part of that rebuilding of the connection between tribes and these lands. So it's good to be here in Menominee and just to remember how far we've come. These are the topics I'm going to cover today. I'm not going to go through them until I hit them. A little bit about just time and space where we are and in the legislative process. So we're in a midterm election year, which means that the president's not up for re-election, but Congress has its midterm elections, which means the entire House of Representatives is up for re-election. 1/3 of the Senate's up for re-election. Statistically, historically, when you have the president's party in the majority in Congress, they don't tend to do well in the midterm re-elections. There's always exceptions to the rules, but historically that's the case, and I'll get into some of the predictions of that towards the end. That being said, the Trump administration, I have to admit and acknowledge that I've never seen more focus on forest management and timber production from any administration than this one. In 2025, the president issued an executive order dealing with timber production, expansion of American timber production as a national security issue. And this is consistent with other initiatives of the Trump administration, where there's an attempt to rebuild American manufacturing and production, whether it's energy or fertilizer, whatever it is, but timber is part of that too. And so from a policy posture, the administration wants to do more with forest management. You're seeing that with the directives to federal agencies, but sometimes that doesn't connect with some of the budget priorities and those types of things. In terms of forest management on federal lands, USDA, the Secretary in April of 25 issued an emergency declaration for treatment of lands in need of forest health treatment, and so there's a new urgency to get work done on at least Forest Service lands. And then on the trade side, the president has been very aggressive on tariffs and countervailing duties on Canadian lumber imports that are competing with American production. But all of that, unfortunately, comes at a time when the market for timber and lumber products are incredibly bad. And so it's one of those best of times, worst of times, where there's never been more emphasis and more administrative support of forest management and timber production, but the markets are in a difficult position. Going over appropriations a little bit, this is the lifeblood of these federal programs. We're in fiscal year 2026 until October 1st. We're not in a continuing resolution, and the bill is fully enacted, which happened in January. For the BIA, the total number of funding is $2.49 billion, which is a slight increase over fiscal year 2025. BIA Forestry, as Caleb and Cody mentioned, we're about $62.8 million, which is more or less flat funding. And for fiscal year 2026, the budget cuts have been largely rejected by Congress. Now Congress is doing work on the FY27 budget, which, like I said, starts in the fiscal year starts in October 1st. Everyone said they wanted to avoid the Trump budget numbers. I have to get into them a little bit. So on the Hill, we say the president proposes and Congress disposes, which means that every year the White House has to produce a budget. It's just a proposal. It has no legal impact or bearing. Congress constitutionally writes the checks, and that starts in the House of Representatives every year. And so the Trump budget came out in early April. Its proposal for Indian Affairs within the Department of Interior was $4.9 billion, which was a significant reduction from FY26 levels. Its proposal for BIA Forestry, I can hardly read the numbers. Someday I'm going to be wearing glasses up here. This is not the year. Oh, thank you for enlarging that. Much better. The Trump budget would have reduced BIA forestry funding to just $25.13 million, which would have been a 61% reduction. I've never seen that. To be fair, there are other agencies within Interior that saw the same or worse proposed reductions. But it is a disconnect from the administration's intention to be producing more volume from federal lands, including Indian trust lands. Fortunately, the House bill has rejected the president's budget numbers. Just a couple weeks ago, the House the full House Appropriations Committee passed its version of the FY27 Interior Appropriations Bill, and this is where I had to write the numbers down. For BIA Forestry, it appropriates $66 million, which is a $3 million increase over FY26 levels. Not a huge increase, but not a 61% decrease. And just to put that in terms of humans, the Trump budget proposal for BIA would have reduced BIA employees by 760 people, which is about 20% of the existing BIA staffing. So fairly significant budget reductions. Instead, the House Committee version of the Interior Appropriations Bill would fund BIA at $2.6 billion, which is $336 million over FY26. So even though it's the same party controlling the White House and the House of Representatives, very different perspectives on budget numbers. And I just have to say, thank the Lord for Tom Cole of Oklahoma, who's chairman of that committee and a very good friend of Indian country. Moving on to the legislative front, there's a lot going on, and while the administration is very focused on forest management, Congress is also very focused on forest management. There's general dissatisfaction with what's happening on federal lands in terms of fire, and that this is a trend that's been going on for 15, 20 years. Each party has its own ideas about how to deal with that. With Republican control in the House, we've had fertile ground in at least talking about different ways of involving tribes into federal forest management, as well as improving tribal management of their own lands. As Cody and Caleb talked about, there's an ATARA reauthorization and amendments bill that is moving slowly, too slowly, I think. We helped develop the text of that legislation. The bill was introduced by Congressman Hurd of Colorado, who's the chairman of the Indian Affairs Subcommittee. There was a hearing in November of 2025 in the Indian Affairs Subcommittee, but there's been no markup, meaning the committee has not passed the bill. There's no Senate companion to the bill. And so that's why ITC was very concerned about the ATARA program expiring, which it does next week. And so we have supported the administrative extension, which it sounds like may be happening, and that buys us a little more time to do a permanent legislative extension and amendment of it. The Forest Act, excuse me, is kind of a continuum of ideas that we've been working with Republicans on that would functionally apply Indian forest management laws and processes onto federal lands when tribes are doing fuels restoration work on federal lands. I have to say that both Republicans and Democrats, the administration, all are interested in the idea, but each of them have their own level of concerns with it. And we just haven't been able to get very much progress made on it. The bill itself hasn't really even been introduced. It's still in draft form. As Cody said, we're still working with the Forest Service, and we're running out of time this Congress, because this Congress ends in December. So I expect this discussion to continue happening into the next Congress, and potentially with a different party in charge. We'll go into a little more detail on this in this afternoon's panel discussion. Congressman Huffman, who's the ranking member, which means the highest ranking minority party member, Democrat in this case, on the House Natural Resources Committee of Northern California, he's introduced this legislation, which is basically a bill to codify and establish co-management, co-stewardship authorities for federal agencies, mostly the Forest Service, but also extends to interior agencies like Parks and Fish and Wildlife Service. It's a very comprehensive bill. It keeps changing. Forest Service provides technical input, DOI provides technical input, ITC member tribes are all providing technical input. So there's a lot of dialogue happening on the side. It was introduced in May. There was a hearing held in June of 2025. A year later, the bill still hasn't been marked up or approved by the committee. Fix Our Forests Act, which is a national scale, not tribal specific bill to speed up fuels projects, particularly in the WUI, wildland urban interface, and in high priority areas, has passed the House. It's still stuck in the Senate. There's a lot of political negotiations happening there. Unclear if that's going to be passed into law this year or not. A couple other bills that I neglected to put on here that are important to note. Senator Murkowski of Alaska has a Tribal Forest Protection Amendments Act, which would do a few things. First, it would add ANCs to the eligibility criteria. It would expand or remove the proximity requirements for TFPA projects, which currently have to be adjacent to the federal land has to be adjacent to tribal lands. Her bill would eliminate that, and also allows TFPA work to be done on reservation, not just on the federal lands. Her bill has passed the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, but has not passed the Senate yet. And then finally, just while I was flying here, there was legislation introduced called the Great American Outdoors Act, which is a bipartisan bill that takes oil and gas money from onshore federal oil and gas leasing payments and puts it, this is a kind of a reauthorization, but it puts $1.9 billion a year towards the backlog, deferred maintenance backlog of Forest Service and interior agencies for parks, campgrounds, boat ramps, that type of thing. In the original deal, which was struck several years ago, it also included some of that funding goes to BIE schools, which is a good thing. Unfortunately, none of it goes to BIA proper for forest management or anything like that. Farm Bill. Does anyone know what movie this is from? Yeah, good. We're all over 40. The Farm Bill is the never-ending story. It is something that should have been reauthorized several years ago, and I've been coming up in front of you every year saying it's going to happen. I think it was supposed to happen in 2022, 2023, and here we are in 2026. May not happen in 2026. We'll see what happens, but midterm elections play into this, and I'll touch on that a little bit. But the Farm Bill, where we are specifically, the old one expired. It was the 2018 Farm Bill. It expired. Parts of it have been extended. Parts of it have not been extended. The House has, for the second time, passed its version of the Farm Bill, and just did that in April. I say bipartisan support. I would say mostly not bipartisan support. A few Democrats voted for it. Three or four. The Senate has not had a markup on its version of the bill yet. They keep saying it's going to happen sometime between July 4th and the August recess. We'll see. Part of the political hangup is that I think it was the One Big Beautiful Bill, there were changes to the SNAP program and how those types of programs are implemented that were very controversial from a partisan standpoint. And the Farm Bill addresses that, and so the Republicans are probably going to be facing a lot of tough votes on SNAP and food support programs. There's a few key provisions in there. The big ones for us, for ITC's purposes, is the TFPA demonstration program in the 2018 Farm Bill, which created a 638 type mechanism for doing TFPA. That gets permanent extension. Good Neighbor Authority, the ability of tribes to be able to keep and retain receipts from G&A projects to put into projects, that gets fixed fully and comprehensively, and then there's a few other things. Nothing earth-shattering yet, but definitely some positive developments. Forest Service, I'm going to leave all that to Rachel. I'm just going to skip that. Same, we covered wildland fire. Okay, so now we look into the crystal ball. Like, where are we going? What's going to happen, and what does it matter to Indian forestry? Like I said, we're in a midterm election situation. We're almost to the August recess, and then after the August recess, Congress is in for a couple of weeks, and then they go back and out to their states and run for re-election. And so nothing really happens in Congress, not much. And if the Republicans are going to try to get any major legislation done, it's got to be done before the election. And here's why. Because if Democrats capture the House in the fall election, they wouldn't be sworn in until January. But after the election, you're in a lame duck session. And Democrats are not going to cut any deals if they know that they're going to be in the majority in a couple months. And so that's why the Republicans, between now and October, anything that's going to happen is going to happen in that window. Normally, I just kind of look into the crystal ball and tell you what's happening based on historical circumstances and that type of thing. Like I said, traditionally, the president's party does not do well in midterm elections. Not always the case. I don't have to look into the crystal ball into the year. I can just look at online predictive markets like Kalshi, and that's the chart at the top. Somehow, Kalshi and other predictive markets have been able to predict the United States invasions of Iran and Venezuela, the global energy prices. Someone's got insider information and makes a lot of money off of it. So why not look to that for the outcomes of U.S. elections? And as you can see, the blue line is the betting that the House will flip to Democrat in the fall election. So there's a divergence. I think it's like 78% likelihood from the betting scenario that the House will flip Democrat. I mean, this is predictive, who knows? But that's a likely scenario. The Senate, more of a toss-up, could go either way. The implications for ITC, we work well with both parties. We get more done in terms of active forest management and authorities with Republicans, but we generally do better with funding mechanisms, co-stewardship, co-management type mechanisms under Democrat control. If we have a mixed House, a Democrat House and Republican Senate, or vice versa, we can work on both of those. So just know that we work well with both sides. Our message is consistent with both of them, and we're making progress with both of them. That concludes my presentation today. Thank you.